just like the judiciary system, you have an overriding human system that's trying to be self-correcting or on top of
Yeah.
the algorithm. I mean, the AI algorithm itself. That's really good. I mean, that's a good idea. I
Right.
think we should. I mean, I think we'll definitely include this in the paper. But obviously, you can pick it up and
Mhm.
build it by yourself. I mean, you're by all rights. You have the. I mean, the ideas here to also implement, right? And I think the kind of capacity building, which
Mhm.
is like the right word for it, but more like the high-end capacity
Right.
building for to understand what the algorithm is and how it works and how do you
Right.
interfere in it at a point where it actually matters, right? And then the code and morality,
Right.
what you mentioned. I have a question on code and morality in a bit, but I'll just,
Mhm.
I mean, that's one thing. So to summarize that, that was really good point. I think the second point, you said that bring it. I think we actually spoke to a social scientist yesterday. He mentioned that like bring in
Mhm.
at the design stage itself, bring in diversity, right? And then bring in teams. So that's the
Mhm.
thing that he also mentioned. So I think we all like overlapping. So many of the
Mhm.
interviews, I'm happy to hear that, see that we are also coming to certain conclusions that I think overall all the experts agree on certain things. Of course, the things that they
Mhm.
don't agree
Right.
on is the one that we don't understand. Nobody understands. But the ones that we agree on, I think it's already coming
Mhm.
out. So that's really, I think, useful for our paper. So just in terms of
Mhm.
code and morality, um,
Yes.
let me just ask you, say for example, right, you're working with the government. So
Mhm.
I mean, just again brainstorming. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but just say like what
Mhm.
happened in social media, in regulating social media, stuff like that. It's still a big black box. I mean, me and
Right.
Rajeshwari also wrote about it, and especially on the digital policy, it's still not come out right. I mean, they tried to do that for the last
Mhm.
5 6 years, and it's still not like there's no one rule law that everybody can face. But we're having scams on a daily basis, and we're having all kinds of abuse and
Mhm.
digital abuse and stuff like that.
Right.
But anyway, that's one story. So we are already moving to the next stage, which is AI, and using AI to maybe even what do you call that? Distort your elections or distort your political system,
Mhm.
your bureaucracy, your hiring
Right.
systems. You work in the hiring
Right.
HR system, so you know how bias can come in, and you use an AI system that you buy from, say, IBM or something. It could be inherently biased, and you're already hiring again the
Mhm.
same cast or the same people that because they are the ones who fit in.
Mhm.
And then for a low end job, you're hiring the same
Right.
people who fit in,
Right.
right? So, say, I mean,
Mhm.
for a non untouchable or whatever from for the last 70 years, nothing's maybe changed for them, right? We could argue that. I mean, I think we can argue that both ways, academics, but let's not go into that. But I'm just saying, if that's the case, how do you see, for example, the main point I'm trying to ask you is like, how do you see this coded, like say coded ethics or coded justice or ethical
Mhm.
AI
Coded
being in
morality.
the hands of the private sector
Mhm.
and not
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
regulated by the government. So it's actually an efficiency model being run by efficiency, but everybody's using
Mhm.
it to access it. And that's like in economics, that's a big time problem because you have the efficiency system running the whole
Mhm.
the system. Like for example, you have in
Right.
India, like the software industry is exporting and getting all the credit for India's growth. But majority of the farmers or the people who are working their daily tasks and they're not getting any credit
Mhm.
for their work, right? So that there's this injustice that happens between equity and efficiency.
Right.
So in efficiency, again, this
Right.
goes into the private
Right.
sector, and then the in terms of the equity, in
Mhm.
terms of government trying to make it a level playing field for everyone. AI is being controlled by private sector, and they're charging
Mhm.
you for it. Blah blah blah. So do you? I asked actually Professor, like, but let me ask you one thing: like coded justice, do you see
Mhm.
at some point there will be government intervention? That's the first point. The second point is, do you see at some point like what we did for Rupee, trying to get rid of visas and all that? We might have our own open source model, right? So that might be a little more inclusive, more free, funded by the government. It might take too long, but what are your ideas on this?
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, you are right. Actually, when private sector uses this coded justice, um, it is only talking about its own efficiency actually. So, and if you don't regulate it, then private sector, they can have their own inbuilt, algorithm. So, who will decide like justice? Like that is a big question to ask. Like justice, like what is justice, and who will decide like what is just, what is fair? If you give it only in the hands of private sector, they might misuse it, and because they are working for their own shareholders and they just want profit, right? If you talk about Amazon or anyone. So they are just seeking their own profit and efficiency. So one thing is that, like, who will decide what is moral? And just like I told you, morality could differ as per the country and the society. So then it will differ as per the private sector, the company. When you talk of Amazon, so I have heard that in Amazon the management is very strict and it is more customer centric and less employee centric. So since you talked about recruitment, so that is why Amazon used to hire people using algorithms in the US. And it was actually hiring mostly men who are experts in software engineering, and it was keeping aside women. It was rejecting the resumes of women who are experts in software engineering. So then Amazon self-corrected because it came up in various media and journal articles came up on that. So it was not yet regulated by government, but against certain sections. So we are trying to create a layer so that it balances out. So we have a good intention. Intention is good, but since there is sampling bias and data bias, and because so much of chat gpt has been trained so much on the western data, because much of the data comes from the west. I was reading one of the articles, it was saying like more than 50% is actually the data comes from the west, the newspaper articles and everything, the CNN, whatever the BBC publishes, it picks up that. So it is very difficult to say like how it's going to pan out, like how coded morality will behave. So right now we cannot say that generative AI, the human algorithm interaction in generative AI would be dangerous or not. We cannot say exactly that. But yes, it is a very complex thing, and in some cases it could be dangerous. In it could be dangerous, like the underdeveloped, like in India, in these kind of Bangladesh, because there is obviously sampling bias, because the much of the data that ChatGPT is picking up, it's picking from certain Western media, so it could be biased in its responses when it comes to Indian context, when it comes to Pakistan, Bangladesh, subcontinent. So in that way, so it is difficult to say whether it would be dangerous or not when it comes to generative AI. But yes, through my findings, discriminative AI, when we talk about discriminative AI, it is very much, it is grim. Like, as I talked about Delhi police and, the discrimination that certain sections are feeling and that they are being targeted. So yeah, that's all from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I just go back to my question, but before I think this last part that you kind of missed, but I'll remind you. But just to, I think you gave us a good example of the Delhi police, right? That's a very good one. That's the kind of, I mean, I was just looking for an example that you have for the algorithmic, the old
Mhm.
school algorithmic bias, which is kind of based on that, right?
Mhm.
So do you see any change that might
Correct.
happen once the ChatGPT kind of more generative AI comes in for assisting humans to solve this kind of problem. As you were talking, actually, this is an
Mhm.
open-ended question. So as you were talking, I just thought about it. Like you said, these are all language. It's called LLM, right? Large language models. So basically, it's based on language. It's not really based on, ethics or common, anything else like economics or anything. But we
Mhm.
can kind of code
Mhm.
that in as
Right.
well, I guess, at some
Right.
point. So that's the beauty of it. I mean, I
Right.
think I was talking to Prof. Sudeep about that, saying how can you say keep the
Mhm.
Constitution as a framework to make sure that any answer that you
Mhm.
ask that is not in the right of the Constitution, like Google answers. I mean, I think Gemini was the first one to actually say, sorry, I
Yeah.
cannot
Right.
answer this question because it's not.
Mhm.
It's an ethical issue that I cannot answer this question or something like that. It gave a
Yeah.
standard answer, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so that could be the future as
Mhm.
well. I mean, it could be safe that way, right? So I don't know. I mean, you can tell us your comments about that, and then
Mhm.
so how this might change once the ChatGPT kind of thing comes where it can self-correct on its own because there's an element of self-correction, right? That's the thing I was talking to
Yeah, right.
with your prof that day. So that was very good
Mhm.
conversation we had. So I wanted
Mhm.
your thoughts on it because you're coming from a public policy point of view. So I was thinking you could add to that. And also
Yeah.
the last one was connected to your comment on data sampling, right? Which is basically the issue that I kind of raised, like in terms of data representation. So because it's underrepresented,
Yeah, right.
you're not getting it. So what can we do in the future? Waiting is one, but like for India, it's going to be problematic because we don't even have the language models for Indian languages, right? Like Devanagari script kind of thing, which always comes later, like 10, 15 years later. It might come faster for AI, I guess, but hopefully let's hope that might happen. But you can
Mhm.
just give us your comments on all these like few things.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, you asked like, since this is large language model, so like, would it be safe? Like when now we are having Chat GPT, which is a large language model. So I would say like,
So
language,
I think, sorry,
language is.
just a quick,
Uh,
like, no, I just want to ask you, when you said that the old school model in Delhi police is causing that negative loop, between the human bias and
uh,
the old school
right.
algorithm bias, will ChatGPT improve that a bit? That's like the first question, and then LLM after that one.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so Chat GPT, actually, it is difficult to say whether it will improve it or not because, uh, obviously there is a loop, but since cognitive bias is interacting with the various, with the bias in Chat GPT, so it is difficult to say like how the positive aspect of coded morality will interact with the negative aspect of inbuilt bias in ChatGPT. So right now it would be difficult to comment on that because I have found amplification also happening. In certain cases, bias was getting amplified in chat gpt, so that shows that that is right what you are saying, like positive, that feedback loop uh, was coming in certain cases, but in certain cases I was getting a very good, response, very neutral kind of response. I was getting both positive aspects, negative aspects. It was a kind of discussion, that chat gpt was giving me, so it was very neutral in some ways. And when I changed the societies, like I already talked about, like American society, then Pakistan society, Indian society. So uh, different kinds of, biases were coming over there. So it is difficult to say right now whether in future, Chat GPT or these large language models, would they be safe or not. I would say we are creating. This is a, never ending kind of thing because ultimately these large language models are based on language, and language is written by humans. So when you go to the root, so ultimately the bias will be there if you go to the root of it, because the human is having his bias, and uh, we are using that, biased. That is why we say, silence. Silence is a beautiful thing, that shunya, the concept of, shunya, because when you don't speak, then there is no possibility of bias. But once you write, once you write it, and once you speak, so that's when the problem happens. That is the root actually. So I don't think LLM would be safe as of now. LLM going forward, it will not be very safe, and
Mm,
the bias problem will remain. That's my
mm,
opinion actually. Yeah.
mm,
So if you go to the root of it,
mm,
so it is very easy to, yeah, you can understand, like the bias will not go, and
mm,
in some cases bias will be amplified, in some cases it would be reduced, but
mm,
overall bias will remain.
mm,
And certain biases would be there against certain communities. So, and it has been the case ever since, if you go to ancient times also, so it has been the case, like a dominant power, authority. So uh, so it will remain, that authority would remain. Actually, I wrote a paper, and it is still under consideration. It was
Mhm.
for this GCPA journal. So in that also I was comparing this. So I was comparing the kind of authority these algorithms have created, and I was saying that now we are going back to traditional authority systems when the kings ruled, but
Authoritarian.
that is a very different thing. So we should not bring that here. So yeah,
No, no,
but
no,
you
that
got
is
the
relevant.
point.
No,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
relevant because if you, I mean, it's also connected with your point on. I mean, I think maybe you just slipped that point, but the concept of zero and shunya and peace and all that, right? But that usually in political
Mhm.
sense, that's like the opposite. Peace only happens when there's a balance of power. Like there's already, all the blood is lost, and then it comes to a peace where you kind of come to a balance of power, and then I mean the realist kind of
Mm,
sense, right? So I mean, you can also talk
right,
about
right,
that, but I mean, you can't get peace unless there's the war is over, kind of thing. So that's also there, right?
right,
But I mean, we
right.
can talk about it, but I mean, it's a very complex. I mean, it's very, very theoretical as well. But I'm just
Mhm.
trying to capture your expertise here. So